The house is full of antiques, including me.
So what else do you have here?
This is a Japanese copy of the samurai sword that they decapitate you with.
95-year-old Louis Zamperini's home is too little to hold memories of a life so large. There are the trophies honoring his athletic accomplishments.
Well, these are the 5 torches that I carried.
So these 5 torches you carried in 5 different Olympic ceremonies.
Right.
And then there are the souvenirs from the prison camps where he spent 2 years of his life.
This is the fork I used. It's a bamboo fork.
An old belt buckle he still wears.
I'm surprised the Japanese didn't take it away from me because they were short of brass.
But Louis Zamperini's story was pretty much ancient history. An elderly man waving in a parade. Until a best-selling book reminded the world of his harrowing tale. His first fame came when he was just a teenager. In 1936, he made the U.S. Olympic team. At 19, he was the youngest qualifier in the 5,000 meters. He didn't win, but Louis Zamperini became a household name, a sports hero. A few years later, the nation was at war. Zamperini was a bombardier in the Army Air Corps. On this very day, 69 years ago, his B-24 crashed into the Pacific.
Our number 1 engine, the RPMs dropped. This plane was barely flying with 4 motors, and with 2 gone, it just dropped like a rock. And so we hit the water nose down. I felt like someone hit me in the forehead with a sledgehammer. The plane was completely blown apart.
What happened next was documented in this 1998 story from correspondent Bob Simon.
Zamperini spotted a life raft floating rapidly away from the burning waters. He swam to it.
47 days in an inflatable raft.
We never prayed before, but on a raft you pray like a foxhole.
He fought off sharks.
This shark was so big that he could have taken 1 bite and he could have bitten that raft in 2.
And battled the sea.
I was in a violent storm. I never seen anything like it.
Things went from bad to worse. Zamperini was near death when he was captured by the Japanese and taken to a place known as Execution Island, where every known prisoner had been put to death.
They took great joy in telling us we were going to be executed, and they'd always go through the motion.
It got even worse. His fame back home led to hours of torture and beatings at the hands of a sadistic guard nicknamed the Bird.
I couldn't bear to look in his eyes. I just couldn't do it. To me, they were that sadistic.
When he wasn't being beaten, he was starved, like most of the Americans held by the Japanese, but somehow he survived. Louis Zamperini returned home a hero.
This is your life.
There were TV appearances. His life appeared to return to normal. But the war years, while gone, were anything but forgotten. Haunted by nightmares, he turned to alcohol. Then, in a last-ditch effort to save his marriage and perhaps his life, Zamperini joined his wife Cynthia at a prayer service led by a young Billy Graham. Graham's sermon touched on the power of forgiveness.
It was the first night in 2 years and a half that I didn't have a nightmare, and I haven't had one since. So the forgiveness, it was the complete healing factor in my life.
Which is why Zamperini decided to commit himself to a lifetime of forgiveness. And that meant he had to go back to Japan to see the prison guards who'd tried so hard to destroy him.
The most important thing in my Christian life was to know that I not only forgave him verbally, but to see him face to face and tell him that I forgave him.
That was 61 years ago, and our story would end there, were it not for the book, Unbroken.
This is the English version.
Here's Louis.
He's become a celebrity all over again. Readers clamor to see him,
And I said, no way.
to hear him, to applaud his life.
When you finished reading that book, what did you think?
It put me back in prison. And I had to stop and look out the window to be sure I wasn't back in prison.
Did you ever imagine it would be a bestseller?
Well, she's a great writer.
She is author Laura Hillenbrand. Her last book was the bestseller Seabiscuit. Unbroken took her 7 years to research and write. But in all that time, you may be surprised to learn that the author and the subject of her story never met, not even once.
That's real sad. We talk back and forth every week. Well, the research, details. And even when I would tell her something, she would double check on it.
Hillenbrand never met him because she has chronic fatigue syndrome and finds it difficult to leave her home here in this neighborhood of Washington, D.C. So, as Zamperini did, we spoke with her by telephone.
Patients often go into times where they are literally unable to get out of bed for weeks or months or years. And it was something that helped me identify with Louis, because his story is largely about suffering.
Hillenbrand says she thinks not meeting Zamperini actually made her book better.
Because when he was telling me his stories, I wasn't looking at a 90-year-old man. I was thinking about a 17-year-old runner or a 26-year-old guy out on a life raft. And I was able to visualize it, I think, a lot better because I wasn't in the room with him. I think it enabled me to tell the story more fully that way.
But while Hillenbrand came to know nearly everything about Zamperini, he knew almost nothing about her.
When the papers printed her story, I couldn't believe it. The only thing I could do, and I felt was proper, I sent her one of my Purple Hearts, and I said, you deserve this more than I do.
Why did you feel she deserved it more than...
Well, she's been suffering for 30 years. I suffered for a couple of years. So I'd rather suffer intently for a couple of years than to have a long, drawn-out siege like she's going through.
Turns out the 45-year-old infirm author and the aging but vital veteran share much more than the past.
Laura has said that when times get really tough for her, she calls you.
We talk to each other on the phone. Okay, so people say, oh yeah, Louis is my inspiration. Well, I might say that she's my inspiration.
When Hillenbrand first sent Zamperini a copy of her book, she sent along this letter.
To have before me an example of someone who has overcome superlative hardships and emerged into a life filled with joy has been deeply inspiring to me at a time when I needed it most. I can't wait for you to read my book. I think you'll love it.
When we talked with Zamperini, he said he hoped one day to meet Hillenbrand, that he had a message.
Well, I don't think we'll tell each other very much except I love you.
Not long ago, that hope became a reality. While in Washington, he paid a visit to her home.
He told me as we were hugging each other and saying goodbye, he said that the book was the crescendo of his life, and he believes he's lived this long so he could see it written and read. And that was the loveliest thing he's ever said to me.
As for Louis Zamperini, he has something to share with all his newfound admirers.
You forgave your Japanese enemies. Do you think Americans forgive enough?
No, I think that's the hardest thing in life, I think, is forgive. Hate is self-destructive. If you hate somebody, you're not hurting the person you hate, you're hurting yourself. And that's a healing. Actually, it's a real healing, forgiveness.